She faced the coldest doctor for 5 years, but what she discovered transformed everything forever. Sarah Whitman's heart raced as she sat in the waiting room of Dr. Miles Hargrove's office, the sterile smell of antiseptic suffocating her. For 5 years, she had endured his clinical detachment, counting the seconds until her name would be called. Each visit felt like an exercise in futility, her words lost among the buzz of machines and the sterile white walls that echoed her isolation. She was a number, a statistic of chronic illness marked by glaring charts and stark diagnoses. And as she looked around at the other patients, sharing those same weary eyes, the burden of their collective apathy submerged her further in dread. Was this all there was? Every month brought new financial strains, medical bills piling high like the autumn leaves that had begun swirling outside, swirling like her complicated thoughts. She fought just as hard to be a present mother to her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, who was an effervescent spark of joy in her otherwise dark days. Yet each evening, after the last cup of coffee was served at the diner, sleepless nights crept in. With every beep of the train whistle penetrating her window at odd hours, Sarah wrestled with gnawing anxiety. Would they make it through the month? Could she bear another humiliating consultation in a place that felt like an arena for her despair? The juxtaposition of motherhood and illness weighed heavily on her, a paradox she couldn't escape. Dr. Hargrove himself was a wall of ice, concise and curt, focusing solely on the clinical aspects of her condition, hardly meeting her gaze. His refusal to recognize the strength found in vulnerability grated at her. "It's just a symptom," he would say, and each time, it felt as if he pulled yet another stitch from the fragile tapestry of hope she knitted together. But was she ready to confront him? Little pieces of her resolve chipped away under the weight of his dismissive stance. An uncomfortable truth gnawed at her: the more she kept silent, the more she felt her identity unraveling, and yet, a flicker of hope appeared at the diner one rainy afternoon when Helen, a retired nurse who once worked with Dr. Hargrove, shared stories of his humanity. "He wasn't always this way," she insisted, her eyes brimming with a deep understanding that warmed Sarah's weary heart. Helen spoke of loss, of patients who brought out the doctor's empathetic side but left life too early. Maybe he was just a man shaped by the same struggles she faced. Sarah's spirit rekindled, recognizing that her suffering wasn't a vertical line of isolation but part of a broader network. Might she channel this newfound strength into a confrontation that honored both her journey and her daughter's future? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Driven, Sarah meticulously researched her family's history, unearthing a legacy of medical pioneers, some of whom had been marginalized and forgotten just as she felt. Seeing their faces in dusty photos lit a fire she hadn't known was there. They had fought relentlessly against the tide of indifference, and now, so would she. As rain lashed against the diner windows when she finally stood before Dr. Hargrove, Sarah steeled herself for a confrontation that felt as monumental as a freight train rushing forward. Emotions tangled with memories, leaving her exhaling clouds of steam with every breath. Her heart swelled with determination, edged with lingering doubt. Could she change a man so set in his ways? Would he see the heart beneath the statistics? As she stepped into the sterile office, the door creaked ominously behind her, sealing her fate into an unknown abyss. Her voice, once a whisper in the shadows, gathered strength, ready to burst forth. In this charged moment, Sarah prepared to unravel not just the realities of her suffering but the deeper emotional fabric of a man she had grown to resent. Would he finally listen? The air crackled between them, and as she opened her mouth to speak, a doubt rooted deep within her, whispering, would they find the common ground necessary for true healing? The silence that enveloped the office was thick, like the dense fog that rolled in off the bay. Sarah stood facing Dr. Hargrove, the sterile surroundings amplifying her vulnerability. As her breath hitched, she couldn't help but wonder if her confrontation would mirror the multitude of visits before filled with unuttered emotions, stifling clinical dialogue, and an ever-present weight of helplessness. "Doctor," she began, her voice quivering as if fragile, "I need to talk about my treatment." The words spilled from her mouth like a dam bursting. She hesitated, scanning his face for some sign of empathy, but his expression remained unreadable. "I feel like a statistic under your watch. I need you to see me to really listen." His gaze flickered to her, then dropped to the clipboard in front of him. "We're here to address your symptoms, Sarah. I assure you, my focus is on your health. The numbers indicate—" "No," she interrupted, fueled by urgency. "The numbers don't reflect my reality. My pain, my struggles, they are not just numbers. They're my life." As she spoke, an unfamiliar warmth blossomed in her chest. This was the strength she had unearthed over the years, the very essence of determination that propelled her to this moment, standing her ground against a man who represented her suffering. The contrast between her boldness and his aloofness fascinated her. Why had they both come this far without reaching one another? For the first time, she noticed a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps surprise or confusion. This disturbed his habitual detachment, chipping away at the armor he wore like a second skin. "Your history indicates a chronic illness, not an emotional impediment," he rebutted, but the inflection in his voice suggested he was no longer as certain as he had been moments ago. "Can't you see?" She pressed on, feeling the tide of emotion rise within her. "Chronic illness isn't just a bunch of appointments and prescriptions. It's waking up every morning, fighting the shadows of despair for not just myself, but for my daughter. It's the shame of being a burden." A silence stretched between them, charged with the unseen battle of personal recognition. Sarah's heart pounded in rhythm with her resolve as she noted the subtle shift in Dr. Hargrove's demeanor, a slight relaxation of his posture, a flicker of humanity behind his steely facade. "Perhaps," he began hesitantly, "there are aspects I've overlooked." Beneath the surface, confusion mingled with the opportunity. She saw it in the way he chewed on his lip, a well-practiced movement hinting at inner turmoil. Sarah seized that tender moment, that wavering flicker of hope, a reminder that even the coldest hearts could pulse with blood and emotion. "What did you give up to become this person?" she asked, this time softer, allowing a vulnerability of her own to shimmer through. "Have you ever faced a moment where you questioned your own purpose?" Her questions hung in the air, heavy and alive, stirring something deep within. Seeing Dr. Hargrove wrestle with his own shield ignited both fear and fascination in her spirit. The acknowledgement of his own vulnerability could shift the entire dynamic of their relationship. Yet, a sharp question wormed its way through her thoughts: did he even want to acknowledge that past? Would he extend to her the same grace she was struggling to give him? As the nerve-wracking tension persisted in the room, Sarah's resolve solidified. The transformation she craved wasn't solely to mend her own wounds, but to instigate healing in another, a man entrenched in the very system that had made them both weary. And just as the breakthrough felt imminent, the office door swung open. A nurse entered, bringing with her a cascade of clinical assumptions and pressing necessities, as if the moment had never occurred. The opportunity fizzled out, leaving them both hanging precariously towards an uncertain conclusion. In that instant, Sarah realized that her journey was far from over. She would need to navigate through the complexities of not only her health but the labyrinth of human connection, a journey that demanded patience. As the nurse called out her next appointment time, Sarah glanced at Dr. Hargrove, sensing the air between them had shifted irreversibly. She could now see the cracks in both their facades. "What will it take for you to truly listen?" she challenged, locking eyes with him once more, determined to find the answer. And in that resolve, something larger than either of them loomed ahead, a battle of understanding that would demand not just patience, but courage. Would they tear down the walls? Would they ultimately discover the healing power of a shared connection? The door clicked shut behind the nurse, plunging them back into silence, pregnant with possibility. The quiet that reclaimed the office felt heavier than before, a thick layer of unfinished business adding to the sterile air. Sarah's pulse raced as she approached the threshold of vulnerability that had always eluded her. Dr. Hargrove remained seated, and for a beat, she questioned whether confronting him truly mattered. Yet, the flicker of humanity she had glimpsed ignited a fierce determination in her. "Please," she urged, testing the waters. "If we could, Sarah, I have patients waiting," he interjected, but the edge of his voice was softer, almost weary. "I understand," she replied, choosing her words with care. "But my life isn't a clock to punch. I deserve more than what this system offers." His eyes widened slightly, and she took a deep breath, realizing she had struck a chord. It was more than just her voice attempting to bridge a gap, it was her entire being asserting its worth. "Are you willing to put the numbers aside and consider the person standing in front of you?" Dr. Hargrove shifted in his seat, the tension in his shoulders easing, if only for a moment. Instead of the defensive posture of a man clinging to his professional boundaries, he appeared vulnerable, contemplating the very essence of medicine-human connection. "I don't usually, I know. That's the problem," Sarah cut him off again, sensing the importance of seizing this opportunity. "Listen, I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here for understanding. My illness is part of me, but it doesn't define me. I need your help to navigate that." His nostrils flared in a silent exhale, and for an instant, she glimpsed a shadow of regret in his eyes, the weariness of a man who had long lost touch with the essence of his vocation. What had he sacrificed, she wondered. "Tell me," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you need?" The question danced in the air between them, a bridge connecting their disparate worlds, and Sarah felt an overwhelming surge of hope. Here was the opening she had sought, the chance to break down the walls that had suffocated her progress. "Start with seeing me as a collaborator, not a case. Can we work together?" The intensity of her request forced him to confront his own resistance. She watched as he wrestled with the implications of her words, his fingers drumming against the clipboard as his mind churned through the complexity of patient-doctor dynamics he had never fully scrutinized. "I fear losing objectivity," he finally confessed, staring at his hands as if they held the answer. "Caring is necessary," she interrupted gently. "You can still be professional, but empathy, it creates a healing space." A moment passed where neither spoke, and in that silence, she felt the weight of their shared understanding begin to swell, like the tide rolling in, steadily eroding the sands of clinical detachment. "Then you'll need to help me understand what that means," he directed, his voice gaining strength. "What does collaboration look like for you, Sarah?" With that question, she felt the reins of her journey shift into her hands, the realization that she could define her path. Instead of passively waiting for treatment, she could shape her experience, a radical departure from the years of feeling like an inconsequential piece in a bureaucratic chess game. "I'll share my experiences," she detailed, allowing her thoughts to crystallize. "Every flare-up, every moment of despair. But in return, I want to know your experiences in this system, the pressures, the limitations, the dreams." The subtle shift in power felt exhilarating and terrifying. They could craft a partnership built on transparency, each offering pieces of their lives to the larger puzzle presenting itself. But just as the horizon widened with possibilities, the sound of another knock broke through their budding connection. A stern-faced nurse slid back in, clipboard in hand, announcing the doctor had more urgent matters to attend. "Not again." Sarah felt disappointment pool in her gut as the nurse's words, while polite, deflated the moment they had begun to build. Dr. Hargrove glanced toward her, a flash of frustration crossing his face, but it vanished quickly. "I'll be there," he replied, his tone carrying an undertone of reluctant acceptance. As the nurse retreated, Sarah contemplated the fleeting opportunity that had just slipped away, the weight of her impending vulnerability now heavier than ever. It wasn't enough to articulate her needs, she had to remain steadfast, persistent in her mission to reshape their connection. "What will it take for this to be different?" she whispered to herself, feeling the thrill of her newfound purpose paired with the anxiety of the unknown. A plan formed. She would confront her fears, refusing to simply fold into the background again. The connection she had long sought wasn't just about securing her treatment but paving a path to mutual understanding. As she strode toward the exit, Sarah felt both the sting of disappointment from the interruption and the exhilarating promise of potential. In her heart, she knew she had nudged the door ajar. The question was whether it would swing wide open or slam shut in her face, but one thing was clear: she wasn't done fighting yet. The real journey lay ahead. Would she have the fortitude to keep pushing, to engage with not just Dr. Hargrove, but with herself? As she stepped into the stark corridor, a single thought pressed upon her: the time had come to face not just her doctor, but the very limits she had set for herself. And therein lay a battle that was entirely her own. Stepping into the corridor, Sarah felt the sterile brightness overhead reflecting the duality of her emotions. The fluorescent lights buzzed, echoing her racing thoughts. In that moment of solitude, she contemplated her next steps, a fresh resolve building within her. Each footfall echoed with purpose as she navigated the hallway. The conversations around her faded into indistinguishable noise. They were mere fragments of lives untouched by her struggles. She had spent too long rallying against the notion of being just another patient in a system designed for efficiency over empathy. As she approached the elevator, her reflection caught her eye in the polished metal doors, an image of vulnerability masked by an air of determination. Sarah paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady her racing pulse. The question still fluttered in her mind: how could she make the medical professionals around her see her as more than statistics? In the elevator, the silence felt thicker, pregnant with the weight of unanswered questions. What was her next move? She had broken ground with Dr. Hargrove, but without follow-through, those initial steps could easily crumble. No longer could she allow herself to linger, waiting for others to dictate the pace of her journey. Was she prepared to confront not only Dr. Hargrove again but the systemic barriers that had robbed her of her agency for so long? Outside the confines of that office, she had the power to reclaim control over her treatment, her narrative. She had to transform that flicker of hope into a flame. When the elevator doors slid open, a gust of fresh air welcomed her, a reminder of possibilities that had once been obscured. Sarah pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering above the screen as she drafted a text to Dr. Hargrove. It felt radical to directly communicate her intentions, stripping away formality and diving into the heart of her concerns. I've been reflecting on our last conversation. I want to collaborate. Let us set up a time to talk more deeply about my experiences and yours, she typed, the words flowing with newfound conviction. With a firm press of send, she released the message into the void, an act of both vulnerability and defiance. As she stepped onto the outer street, her heart raced not just from the boldness of her message but from the weight of what lay ahead. She envisioned herself diving into her research, prepared to gather the insights of others in similar circumstances. Shared experiences documented through stories, her own findings on the impact of empathy in healthcare. This was the foundation of her vision for change, but the path was fraught with the threat of doubt. What if Dr. Hargrove didn't respond? What if he dismissed her efforts? She wrestled with those unsettling thoughts, choosing to ignore them in favor of the promise of her purpose. Her phone pinged. A nervous excitement shot through her as she opened the notification. Dr. Hargrove's reply came almost immediately. I'm willing to discuss this further. Let us meet on Thursday. That one response armed her with tangible hope, but it also solidified the reality of her commitment to this collaboration. In preparation, Sarah began to craft a plan, jotting down notes on topics to discuss and questions to ask. Each point represented not only the logistics of her treatment but the depth of understanding she hoped to foster. What if she could challenge Dr. Hargrove to confront his apprehensions? What if he stood in his own way, just like she had? That notion pulsed in her mind, invigorating her. She wasn't just a patient, she could influence this dynamic, prompting shifts that resonated beyond her individual struggles. As she walked in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun, Sarah felt a growing sense of empowerment. With every step, she shed fragments of her old self, the passive observer, and donned the armor of an advocate ready for battle. A vision of herself emerged, a catalyst for change, not only for herself but for others whose voices had been lost in the noise of the system. Soon, she would take a stand, face to face, not only with Dr. Hargrove but with the constraints and expectations of the medical world around her. How far could her determination push against the tide? The anticipation swelled in her chest as she realized that the most challenging opponent she faced was the fear of failure that threatened to rear its head. But this time, she wouldn't let it win. With her eyes set on her meeting, she made a solemn vow: she would be relentless in pursuing the truth of her experiences, and in doing so, redefine what collaboration could truly mean in a healthcare landscape still grappling for humanity. But as Sarah was lost in her thoughts, a figure stepped into her path, shattering her focus completely. She looked up, heart racing, as the face became starkly familiar, someone whose presence threatened to unravel everything she'd just built up in her mind. "You," the person said, voice thick with implications. "We need to talk." The words hung in the air like a thick fog as Sarah's mind raced, grasping at the implications of the unexpected encounter. It was Eric, the nurse who had once treated her during her darkest moments in that same sterile building. A memory flashed in her mind: his dismissive tone, the way he hadn't even looked her in the eye when explaining her treatment options. Now, standing before him, she felt the swell of anger and the sting of resentment surfacing once again. "What do you want, Eric?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The confrontation felt surreal, yet necessary. She could almost hear the ticking clock reminding her of the meeting with Dr. Hargrove, weighing heavily on her mind like an anchor. "I came to apologize," he stated, but the words clashed with the smugness in his demeanor. "Apologize? After all this time? You were just following orders, weren't you?" The surge of intensity, fierce and visceral, she could feel her resolve to change their dynamic coiling inside her, ready to unleash. He stepped closer, his expression softening slightly. "I realize now that I failed to see you as a person. You were just another case, another chart, and exactly. And that's it, isn't it? You didn't care enough to try." She cut him off, testing the boundaries of her newfound assertiveness. "That's why I wanted to talk," he said, now leaning against the wall, frustration edging his tone. "I've been thinking about the role I played in the system and how I can improve. I've seen the kind of conversations and transformations happening in healthcare lately. I want to be part of that change." Her breath caught. Could he really mean it? Was there room in his heart for genuine empathy, a concept she deemed elusive in her previous experiences? For a fleeting moment, a small part of her almost felt pity for him, ensnared in a system just like she had been. "I don't need a lecture on systemic issues, Eric. I want to know how you plan to change," she said, pushing against the flood of conflict in her chest, determined to stay fierce. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing against her. This could either break her or fortify her resolve to confront the very foundations of her treatment. "If you're meeting with Dr. Hargrove, perhaps I could share my perspective," he suggested cautiously. "You might think me useless, but I want to help." A whirlwind of conflicting calculations surged through her mind. Could Eric be an ally instead of an adversary? Engaging with him meant risking her hard-won focus for the meeting ahead, yet it also offered a potential gateway to real change within the medical framework. She hesitated, grappling with her discomfort. She had already asserted her independence, her voice strengthened by her commitment to advocacy. Yet, this unexpected proposition from someone who once overlooked her could mean more than just helping her own situation. It could change the way care was provided for patients like her in the future. "I'll consider it," she replied slowly, her sense of empowerment warring with skepticism. Eric nodded, disappointment flickering across his face, but she sensed a spark beneath it. "I'll be waiting then. Change doesn't happen without conversations. You know that." As they parted ways, Sarah fought to maintain her focus on the coming meeting. The encounter had unveiled a tangled web of personal dilemmas. Was Eric genuine or simply attempting to ease his own guilt? What did collaboration mean now, amidst the uncertainty and the whirlwind of feelings swirling in her mind? The clock moved closer to her appointment as she took measured steps toward her destination, aware that the tension between her and Dr. Hargrove was closing in like a storm. She needed clarity, to sift through her emotions and confront her fears head-on. What role would Eric play in the narrative she was writing for herself? Was he a potential partner in redefining healthcare or merely a distraction from her goal? With each step echoing on the pavement, she felt the thrill of her mission and the heaviness of unexpected burdens. The answers lay ahead, but she could not falter now. As she turned a corner, she spotted a sight that sent chills down her spine. Dr. Hargrove across the street, visible through the front window of a nearby cafe, deep in conversation with a figure she recognized all too well. The moment froze around her. Had Eric orchestrated this meeting, or was it purely a coincidence? She felt the ground beneath her shift, her resolve pooling at the brink of potential upheaval. The time had come to face not just her fears, but the deeper connections within this tangled system. What if this meeting was utterly transformative, revealing things she had never anticipated? As Eric's shadow loomed larger in her mind, Sarah braced for a confrontation much more complex than she had imagined. Walking towards the cafe, Sarah felt an unsettling urgency to reclaim her narrative. The sight of Dr. Hargrove, so unapproachable yet so present in her journey, filled her with both dread and determination. Each step brought a surge of nerves, oscillating between fear of the unknown and the thrill of potential empowerment. As she entered, the doorbell jingled, punctuating her arrival. The cafe was warmly lit, yet it contrasted sharply with the chill spreading through her core. She spotted them immediately, Dr. Hargrove and Eric, their body language revealing an unspoken camaraderie. There they sat, laughing. It felt like a world she had never been invited into, one that made her feel inconsequential and small. She hesitated momentarily, questions tightening her throat. Was this a chance encounter, or had Eric deliberately paved a path to her appointment? Paranoia nibbled at her thoughts. She could turn around, abandon the meeting, save herself from the turmoil of confrontation. But she forced herself to breathe, her resolve sharpening. This wasn't just about her, it was about every patient who had been overlooked in the system Eric had once barely noticed. Steeling herself, she approached their table, her footsteps firm. Dr. Hargrove. Eric. Her voice cut through their conversation with a directness that surprised even her. How far she had come, from being a quiet patient to this assertive figure. Both heads turned, surprise mingling with confusion crossing Dr. Hargrove's face. "Sarah, I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his tone neutral but the underlying current evident. "I figured it was a good opportunity," she replied, looking directly at him. "Especially since you and Eric seem to be in agreement on something." Eric shifted awkwardly in his seat, the tension palpable. "We were just discussing the ways we can better support patients," he said, his demeanor almost sheepish now. "I mentioned the meeting we had scheduled." "Support," she echoed, feeling the need to define and dissect the term. Yet for far too long, support has been synonymous with bureaucracy, hasn't it? It often dismisses rather than empowers. Dr. Hargrove shrugged lightly, but his eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. "That's one perspective, but and yet," she interjected, feeling the weight of responsibility press against her chest, "how many patients have you listened to?" "Really listened to? I was surprised to see you talking to Eric like he's a colleague rather than just a cog in the system." "Your experience formed part of a larger context, Sarah," he replied smoothly, but the defensiveness was clear. "It's difficult to dissect every case to understand individual needs." "Is it? Or is it simply easier to categorize?" Her confidence surged with each word, fueled by the pain of 1,000 unsaid thoughts. "Because that's what happened to me. I became a chart, a number. But no one saw the person behind it all because it makes your lives easier." Dr. Hargrove adjusted his glasses, taking a slow breath. "You're young, passionate, and you're dismissing my point," she said, leaning slightly forward, not allowing him to sidestep the truth. Anger bubbled within her, but it solidified into a determination unlike before. This was her moment to peel back layers of detachment. Eric remained silent, an observer caught between the frayed edges of her grievances and the tension that hung in the air like a standoff. "Look, this isn't just about logistics or having discussions," she continued, feeling bold. "It's about real, tangible change within the healthcare system that can only start with acknowledging failures, yours, mine, and the system's. Are you ready to actually listen?" Dr. Hargrove's gaze met hers, the flicker of recognition igniting an unfamiliar fire. The moment wrapped around them, a plea for transformation resting in the taut atmosphere. "I thought," Hargrove began cautiously, but Sarah could see he was grappling with the weight of her challenge. What if this wasn't just a difficult meeting with a single doctor? What if it represented the beginning of an era where patients could reclaim their voices? Would she lead the charge or fall silent again? As she held his gaze, her pulse quickened, sensing that discovery lingered just out of reach. But this wasn't merely about what she wanted from them, it was about what they owed to those whose voices had remained unheard. In that charged silence, she understood that the real question had shifted. What would she demand from the healthcare system moving forward? And was she prepared to face the consequences of that declaration? The tension lingered, thick and palpable, as Sarah held her breath, waiting for Dr. Hargrove's response. The silence between them felt electric, and for a moment, they both seemed frozen, two opposing forces locked in a battle of wills. In that brief interlude, the bustling cafe faded into the background, her heartbeat became the only rhythm she could focus on. "Listening isn't the problem, Sarah," Dr. Hargrove finally replied, his voice steady yet tinged with challenge. "What truly matters is the willingness to act upon that listening. How do you propose we do that?" Caught off guard, she felt the air rush from her lungs as her own boldness began to waver in the face of an expected leadership role. Act? The question rattled against the walls of her mind. She had been fueled by emotion, by the need to speak up, but now her thoughts raced to construct a plan, something tangible, something that might provoke real change. "Action starts with understanding the individual," she asserted, reclaiming her inner strength. "Training healthcare providers to see beyond their charts and into the lives of the patients they serve. To humanize the process." Eric nodded, as if he was beginning to piece together Sarah's vision. "Training and resources could be reallocated, but we need a framework. Something concrete." His support ignited a flicker of hope, and Sarah felt her words gain substance. "We need to create spaces where patients feel safe to share their stories, free from judgment. Mixed input from healthcare professionals and patients could reshape how care is administered." Dr. Hargrove shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing. "That's easier said than done, and who would take the first steps?" "It would require a cultural shift within the entire system." "A shift that starts here," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "You're a respected figure in the community, Dr. Hargrove. You can advocate for a shift in paradigm. Every voice matters, especially yours." His expression softened momentarily, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Advocacy is one thing, but implementation requires a concrete strategy, costs, training, and patient advocacy measures." The wheels in Sarah's mind began turning, and she slowly realized that she had ventured beyond mere complaints. Now she was formulating a blueprint for a campaign that could ignite change. "Let us create a pilot program," she proposed, her adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Working directly with patients to understand their needs, and then sharing those insights to reshape the training for healthcare professionals." Dr. Hargrove seemed contemplative, but the skepticism in his expression remained. "You'd need to rally support from higher management, and they'll want results quickly. And we'll need to define what success looks like," Sarah acknowledged, feeling emboldened. "But if we start small, we could gradually build a case for expanding this initiative. It's about creating measurable progress." Eric leaned forward, glancing between them. "If you're committed to this, Sarah, I can help. I have some contacts who might support initial funding." "Yes," Sarah exhaled, the excitement igniting a new determination within her. For the first time, she felt like she was mapping her future rather than being swept along by it. Dr. Hargrove regarded her closely, his gaze weighing heavily on her. "And if you encounter opposition?" At that question, Sarah's resolve solidified. "Then we confront it. I refuse to let fear dictate our actions. If we believe in this vision, we owe it to ourselves and those who fall through the cracks to push through." A moment of shared understanding passed between them, a shift in the atmosphere indicating a bridge crossed. But as elation bubbled within her, the daunting realization of potential conflict loomed ahead. What if their efforts encountered steadfast resistance? Sarah's heart raced, knowing that the path to transformation was rarely smooth, but an inner clarity emerged. This was no longer just about personal recovery. It was about reshaping a future where patients could reclaim their narratives. As she sat at that cafe table, the weight of the world felt lighter yet more significant than ever. Still, with hope threading through her veins, she was acutely aware that decisions were looming. What obstacles lay ahead, and would she be ready to face them when the time came? The confrontation with the established system was only beginning to unfold, and a more profound challenge waited just around the corner. What if the very caregivers she sought to influence turned against her? The cafe buzz faded as Sarah stepped back into the rush of the outside world, still reeling from the gravity of her conversation. The crisp autumn air pinched her cheeks, but she welcomed the chill as a reminder that she was alive, on the precipice of something significant. Every breath seemed charged with potential, yet she couldn't shake the undercurrent of anxiety threatening to pull her under. Each stride on the pavement echoed her racing thoughts. What if Dr. Hargrove's words rang true? What if the broader healthcare community stubbornly held on to its traditions, resistant to change? The fear of failure prickled at her confidence. What if she was just a woman with dreams, but without the power to see them realized? Determination crashed against doubt within her, a constant internal struggle. She reached her apartment, a sanctuary where she could strategize without external pressures. As the door clicked shut behind her, she leaned against it for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Papers, post-its, and notes cluttered her small desk, all remnants of her chaotic brainstorming sessions. Settling in, Sarah flicked through the notes, honing in on key points she had scribbled in a moment of fervor. She envisioned a framework that would not just involve passive listening sessions but engage patients in a way that would elevate their voices in real time by involving them in their own healthcare narratives. Pioneering a pilot program meant dismantling barriers between patients and the system that often overlooked them. Flipping through her notes, she spotlighted a crucial aspect: the training of healthcare providers. She had to prepare them for the emotional labor of this initiative. How could she equip them to genuinely connect with patients? More than just statistics, they needed to see people in all their complexity: minds, bodies, and souls. A lightning bolt of insight struck: role-playing scenarios where practitioners would assume the role of the patient, experiencing the frustrations and fears inherent to the healthcare labyrinth. Yet, with every idea ripe for development, the specter of disapproval loomed larger. How would she pitch this to colleagues? Would they scoff at her? Would the whispered doubts from her past surface, freezing her words before they could leave her lips? In the solitude of her apartment, the stakes felt unbearably high. Any misstep could derail everything she fought to create. The phone buzzed, pulling her from her reverie. A message from Eric blinked on the screen, a follow-up to their earlier conversation suggesting contacts he could approach for initial funding. Hope flickered, but apprehension followed closely behind. She needed to be strategic. She had to think carefully. Balancing her laptop on her knees, she began drafting an email summoning all her latent assertiveness, channeling her ideas into something productive. This email could be the flare she needed to ignite a larger conversation about patient-centered care. Gritting her teeth, she typed swiftly, laying out her vision like an architect unveiling a blueprint, but sending the email evoked another wave of self-doubt. What made her believe she could spearhead such an initiative? Deep in her mind, those nagging voices emerged, the ones urging her to second-guess her worth, her place. Yet, the will to push forward threatened to smother that inner critic. Pausing, Sarah reminded herself why she had embarked on this journey in the first place. The fleeting moments in the hospital, the faces of patients who felt neglected, and the stories that remained unshared drove her forward. Each word she typed became a shield against her uncertainty. As she hit send, the weight of that decision surged through her. She couldn't predict whether the forthcoming conversations would affirm or contest her vision, but the act of reaching out was a victory in itself. Looking out the window at the cityscape, she resolved to brace herself for pushback. Each confrontation could sharpen her resolve. For every advocate she'd ally with, there would likely be naysayers. But was she prepared to wield her passion as a sword against their criticisms? The moment of truth loomed. She wouldn't just be confronting colleagues, she would be confronting herself. Was she ready to shoulder the weight of this mission, or would the fear of resistance keep her caged in doubt? Threads of uncertainty braided through her thoughts as she repeated her mantra silently, I will rewrite this narrative. But rewriting narratives often meant shifting paradigms, and change was rarely devoid of conflict. The door of her newfound purpose was ajar, but beyond it lay a battleground. Could she summon the courage to stride through it? With the email dispatched, Sarah felt a jittery energy coursing through her veins. The act had opened a door to possibility, but it also conjured the shadows of doubt, looming larger than ever. She could almost hear a chorus of voices, her own critics, the many not possible whispers that echoed in her past. She paced the small confines of her apartment, transitioning between the thrill of anticipation and the weight of potential failure. With each breath, staring out at the now shadowed cityscape, Sarah turned back to her hastily organized desk, each scattered paper a testament to her chaotic thoughts. She needed clarity. The pilot program's framework could evolve, but only if she could refine her pitch and anticipate the objections that were sure to come. Rushing in with a half-formed idea would result in the very scoffs she dreaded. She sat down, opening a new document on her laptop. If she could visualize the conversation she might face in her mind, perhaps she could craft responses to every critical question. She forced herself to imagine her colleagues, her mentors, sitting across from her, skeptical and sharp-eyed. What makes this necessary? How will you fund it? Are patients really capable of guiding their own narratives? The questions flowed like a river, and soon, she had a bulleted list of responses. For each counterpoint, she recorded solid data like bedrock beneath the delicate structure of her dream. She would point to studies linking patient involvement to better health outcomes, share anecdotal evidence from her experience, and demonstrate the pressing need for empathy in a system that risked becoming too mechanized. As she tapped the keyboard, a surge of confidence ignited like flame to kindling. This was her moment, not just a foundation for her ideas but a declaration of her worth in the field. A realization struck her: this project was not merely her passion, it represented a significant evolution in her professional identity. She could become a vanguard for compassion in a system that desperately needed it, but one looming specter refused to leave her alone. Eric's support was critical, and beyond that, she had to form connections with others who might doubt her capabilities. I can't do this alone, she murmured, brow furrowing. That thought brought another level of tension. Reaching out for help was daunting, but it was undeniably part of leading a change. Gritting her teeth, she sent a quick text to Eric, requesting a meeting to discuss strategies for approaching potential advocates. The moment her fingers lifted from the screen, the weight of that decision hit her. Was she ready to lay herself bare before those who were already positioned as gatekeepers? The approach itself felt fraught with potential humiliation. However, as unease settled within her, an emboldening thought injected clarity. Was she willing to forge forward despite the nerves? This was a moment for growth, an opportunity to weave her passion into the fabric of her professional narrative. Besides, what if her efforts did result in change? The thrill of the possibility began to root itself against the doubt, bolstered by ambition. She leafed through her notes again, finally jotting down a vision statement she could share. This was about rewriting patient narratives, challenging providers to listen and learn, and ultimately evolving the standard of care from impersonal to participatory. As she prepared for her meeting with Eric, a sense of urgency washed over her. The timing was crucial. Initial opinions could form the foundation or the pitfalls of her endeavor. Suddenly, she recalled Dr. Hargrove's final words, echoing in her thoughts, "Are you prepared to face the cold realities?" A jolt of resolve surged through her. She wasn't merely facing a professional challenge, she was staring down her own self-doubt. But could she, despite the stakes, muster the courage to openly battle against the entrenched norms? The door to her newfound mission was cracked wider, revealing the shadows that lurked beyond. What awaited her on the other side would test her resolve in ways she had yet to imagine. Would she sink or swim as she prepared to lead the discourse? The coming conversation would be one she could either rise to or relinquish herself to fear. As Sarah Whitman stepped into Dr. Miles Hargrove's office, the moment felt imbued with a weighty significance. This was no ordinary consultation, it was the culmination of her journey, a fierce battle fought not only against her chronic illness but against the system that had consistently reduced her to a mere statistic. The sterile environment, once suffocating, had transformed into a sanctuary for renewal and determination. "Doctor," she began, her voice calm yet firm. "I want to discuss a new approach to my treatment." The words quaked slightly as she spoke, a blend of apprehension and conviction swirling within her. Gone were the days when she merely accepted the cold directives of the medical establishment. Dr. Hargrove, usually steely and detached, met her gaze with a hint of curiosity. "I'm listening," he replied, setting aside the clipboard that had always masked their exchanges. This was Sarah's fortress of resolve. She shared her vision, a collaborative model where patients redefined their narratives, actively participating in their care. With each word, she witnessed Dr. Hargrove's expression evolving, the faintest flicker of recognition igniting in his eyes. She laid out her proposal with meticulous detail, demonstrating an understanding not only of her own needs but of what the broader healthcare landscape required. "I've thought about the emotional toll that patients carry," she continued passionately. "It's not about merely managing symptoms, it's about recognizing and addressing the human experience." Silence enveloped them, thick with the implications of her words. "That's a radical thought," Dr. Hargrove finally murmured, his tone shifting from skeptical to contemplative. "It's difficult to implement change in a system that often favors statistical efficiency. But it's necessary," she pressed, her assertiveness solidifying with every moment. "Imagine a program where we bring healthcare professionals and patients together, fostering empathy and building trust. We can reshape treatment protocols based on real experiences." She saw him nod, albeit slowly, as if contemplating the vastness of her proposal. In that moment, Sarah recognized the significance of her growth. The young woman who once suffocated under medical detachment was now a beacon of transformation. "Tell me more about your vision," he responded, eyes sparkling with newfound interest. Over the course of their discussion, Sarah felt the doubting voices in her head begin to wane. She detailed her plan, a pilot program focused on role-playing scenarios for medical professionals, systemizing the sharing of patient narratives to cultivate empathy, and involving caregivers in the trials of common experiences. Each point she articulated came alive, an embodiment of justified pride built on her own trials. As the meeting progressed, they discussed logistics, challenges, and potential collaborations. Sarah's once treacherous journey began redefining her professional existence. She had not only confronted her doctor but had clearly articulated a path forward, inspiring him to envisage a collaborative healthcare model that integrated patient voices. Minutes stretched into hours, and the atmosphere shifted to one of enthusiastic co-creation. It was exhilarating. This very encounter, which had the power to influence systems of care, unfolded with surprising ease. Before she left, Dr. Hargrove looked directly at her, sincerity etched across his features. "I underestimated the capacity for empathy to yield real progress. I appreciate your courage in pushing for change." His acknowledgement provided deep-seated gratification. Walking out of the office, Sarah felt liberated. The rigid walls that once hemmed her in were now mere whispers of a past she had conquered. In their place stood a spirited resolve that fueled her purpose. From a passive recipient of healthcare, she had carved her niche as an agent of transformation. Her phone buzzed, the notification sparked exuberance. It was Eric, sharing insights gathered from colleagues willing to support her initiative. Sarah had begun to gather momentum, her network expanding as momentum swirled around her. Days turned into weeks, filled with strategic meetings, brainstorming sessions, and articulating her vision more succinctly than ever. She had built a proposal supported by real data alongside personal anecdotes from fellow patients validating the necessity for change. What once felt like climbing a mountain now felt like a series of stepping stones leading towards summits she hadn't yet anticipated. In a matter of months, Sarah launched the pilot program alongside Dr. Hargrove, who had joined her as a collaborator rather than a gatekeeper. Their partnership, forged through mutual vulnerability, became a profound testament to the power of confronting vulnerability. They held workshops designed to recalibrate interactions, reminding practitioners of the invaluable narratives underpinning each diagnosis. As she stood in front of her peers during the program's inaugural session, pride surged within her. She finally stood at the intersection of professional success and personal fulfillment, now clothed in solid confidence. Today marks a new chapter, she declared. Patients and healthcare professionals will forge a pathway together, redefining experiences in healthcare. This was her moment, a tangible achievement that signified not just individual progress but the collective potential for change. As applause enveloped the room, Sarah reveled in the reality she had created not for herself alone, but for the countless voices yearning for recognition. Her journey had transformed the icy core of her relationship with Dr. Hargrove and initiated a ripple effect, reminding everyone in that room the importance of healing through human connection. With clarity and assurance, Sarah stepped forward, her narrative more than mere ink on paper. It had become a living testament of her resolute spirit. This was the place from which she had emerged, and she would continue to rise, weaving her journey into the fabric of empathetic healthcare that would serve as a blueprint for others. This was Sarah's time. She had transformed not just her story, but the story of many. She had proven that true change is forged through determination and collaboration. Now, as she moved forward, the path ahead was bright, and her destiny was firmly in her hands. You need to subscribe now to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, it makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.